From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Economists have studied how markets work for a long time. Generally, they work well, but markets do not always perform as expected. Jean Tirole of France won the Nobel Prize in Economics for studying why markets are imperfect or inefficient and what governments can do to regulate them. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences announced the $1.1 million prize in Stockholm. It called Mr. Tirole one of the most influential economists of our time. The organization said he had done important research in a number of areas. But, it said, most of all, he has clarified how to understand and regulate industries with only a few powerful firms. A small number of companies that control an industry is called an oligopoly. For about 30 years, Mr. Tirole researched periods when markets failed, that is, when they did not provide good results in price and competition. He looked at how a small number of large companies, or even a single company, can strongly influence industries. Banking and telecommunications were among the industries he studied. The Nobel Committee said that unregulated markets often produce socially undesirable results. They can result in higher prices or companies that use their market position to block others. The committee said it chose Mr. Tirole because he thought about how best to regulate markets. Mr. Tirole works at the Toulouse School of Economics in Toulouse, France. He is 61 years old. The Royal Swedish Academy will honor Mr. Tirole at the Nobel Award ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden, December 10th. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The International Labor Organization recently released a report suggesting that real wage growth in developed economies is nearly unchanged. Real wages include the effects of inflation. Developing economies are mainly responsible for world wage growth. The ILO report says world wage growth is below the 3% rate that existed before the economic crisis of 2008. It says wage growth has slowed to nearly 0% in developed economies over the last 2 years. However, in developing economies like China and other Asian nations, wages have been growing by 6%. Wage growth in Eastern Europe and Central Asia is almost as high. The ILO report says wages in rich nations are still about 3 times higher than in poor countries. It says workers in developed countries earn $3,000 a month on average, compared to $1,000 a month for developing nations. The report says developed nations had increased inequality because of job losses and big differences between the highest and lowest wage earners. That difference between highest and lowest wage earners decreased in some developing countries. The ILO says minimum wage policies, rules for the lowest permitted wages, can play a strong part in dealing with poverty and inequality. Sandra Pulaski is the Deputy Director General for Policy at the ILO. She disagrees with conservative critics of minimum wage policies. They say higher minimum wages mean fewer jobs. However, Ms. Pulaski says employers often find ways to increase productivity to make up for the added cost of wages. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. European Union finance ministers recently reached an agreement that will make it more difficult for tax avoiders to hide their money. The new legislation was approved after Luxembourg and Austria agreed to lift their vetoes. The countries had blocked the bank secrecy law for years. The new law means that depositors will no longer be able to hide their money from governments in EU countries like Luxembourg. So says Algirdas Semeta, the EU Commissioner for Taxation. Luxembourg agreed to share bank information with member countries starting in 2017. Austria has signaled that it will do the same by 2018. Jacob Kirkgaard is a researcher with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He says the agreement is an important milestone in worldwide efforts to stop tax avoidance. He said, the governments of France, Italy, and Germany have pushed for the new law. Many years of bank secrecy have helped Luxembourg become one of Europe's main financial centers. Bank deposits in the country are valued at more than 10 times the size of the nation's yearly economic production. Switzerland once was among the world's biggest tax havens, countries with little bank regulation or with low taxes. But the country ended its bank secrecy policy last year after facing intense legal pressure from Europe and the U.S. People seeking to avoid taxes in their home country can still hide their money in less developed countries where bank supervision is weaker. But Jacob Kirkgaard says the choices and advantages of doing so are shrinking. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. More than 40 countries, including Russia, have applied to be founding members of China's proposed Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Taiwan also sought to become a founding member. But China said no, Taiwan could not be a founding member. China did say that Taiwan could join later if it used an appropriate name. China does not recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Taiwan is a member of the Asian Development Bank under the name of Taipei, China, not Taiwan. China proposed the bank last October as a way to finance roads, bridges, ports, and other needed infrastructure projects in Asia. In only a few months, the number of countries seeking membership nearly doubled. They came from Africa, Europe, South America, Asia, and the Pacific. Some European powers added themselves to the list, as well as South Korea, Australia, and Russia. The United States and Japan have held off at this time. The two countries have said they are concerned about the governance of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. Critics say the AIIB threatens the work of existing development banks, such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Asian Development Bank. The AIIB is expected to start with $100 billion in capital, mostly from China. Experts are watching to see how China will take its leadership role in the new bank. They say China will also have to satisfy other bank members and multinational institutions. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The winner of the 2015 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences studies how people spend their money. He also has explored how spending can affect both living conditions and poverty. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences is presenting the Economics Prize to Professor Angus Deaton of Princeton University in New Jersey. The Nobel Committee says his research has mainly dealt with three questions. How do consumers distribute their spending among different goods? How much of society's wealth is spent and how much is saved? And how do we best measure and study well-being and poverty? Mr. Deaton used household surveys to collect detailed information about how families spend their money. For example, in one study, the Princeton professor examined the relationship between poverty and the amount of calories in the food people ate. The Princeton professor was asked why he paid so much attention to household information. Mr. Deaton said that his studies were mainly about people and their behavior. The Nobel Committee also praised Mr. Deaton's work because it used detailed information about real people, not theoretical ideas. Subjects of his research have included happiness, well-being, and aging. At a press conference, the Nobel Prize winner said he was pleased that his work had been recognized. He also said he believed poverty would decrease. Mr. Deaton is a citizen of both the United States and Britain. He was born in Britain. The Nobel Award is worth almost $1 million. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Oil prices have fallen to their lowest levels since 2009. Brent crude oil, one of several kinds of oil on the world market, recently dropped to below $40 a barrel. However, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, has been unable to reduce production to limit supply. They called on members to maintain an energy dialogue with countries that produce oil but are not OPEC members. About 2/3 of oil production is carried out by non-OPEC countries. But the 13 OPEC member countries could not agree on any production cuts. OPEC oil production continues at record levels. An OPEC report says the group's oil production increased to more than 31 million barrels of oil a day. Some experts say OPEC member Saudi Arabia continues its production levels to keep competitors from gaining market share. OPEC says its high production levels continue because it believes demand will increase in the coming year. Experts say worldwide demand for crude or unprocessed oil is already about 2 million barrels a day below the current supply. That has led some markets to have more oil than needed. Demand for oil has been decreasing as economic activity in many areas around the world has slowed. Slowing demand in China has also been blamed for low oil prices. Economic growth in China has slowed to a yearly rate of 6.9%, the country's slowest growth since 2009. China is the world's second largest economy. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. 13 years have passed since the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks that destroyed the World Trade Center in New York City. Now, its replacement has opened for business. One World Trade Center is America's tallest building at 104 floors or stories. The company Condé Nast Publishing recently moved into offices there. Condé Nast says it will have 2,300 employees spread among 24 floors of the building. The building still raises safety concerns among some people who remember what happened on the site. But those arriving for work soon after Condé Nast offices opened expressed no concerns about their safety. On that first day the building opened for business, Condé Nast, Port Authority, and construction company officials praised the new skyscraper. Condé Nast's chief executive, Charles Townsend, called it a wonderful day for New York City Steve Plate is director of One World Trade Center construction. He says it was important to rebuild what was lost. He sees the building as a gift of remembrance, both for the people who lost their lives there and to remember how people pulled together afterwards. One World Trade Center is 541 meters high. There are 279,000 square meters of space within the building. 60% of the space has been rented or leased by a number of publishing, technology, and communication companies. One World Trade Center cost $3.9 billion to build. It is one of the world's costliest structures. The One World Trade Center website says the structure uses the newest safety and security systems. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Fersuti.